Hello and welcome to Mental Health Matters. It's the show where we take a deep dive into all things mental health and well-being. I'm your host, Dr Audrey Tang, and my co-host today is Judith Crozier. We are going to be discussing the subject of burnout and stressors at work, but also how burnout is different to stress. Welcome to Mental Health Matters again, Judith.
Thank you.
Burnout.
Burnout, yes.
Big subject, isn't it? Have you been there?
I have been there actually. Yes. It was something, and I didn't really want to admit to it when it was happening. It's one of those things that I felt a bit silly. I felt embarrassed, but I didn't know that's what it was until I kind of had the final. When it became apparent, basically.
See, that's really interesting because the whole difference between burnout and stress is that a lot of people will call a level of stress burnout, and it kind of isn't. Those are the signs, and those are things we need to look out for, and we can always wind things back and take a step back so it doesn't get into burnout. But burnout is almost this real, it's absolute exhaustion, it's tearfulness, it's irritability with everything. It's a real effect on your day-to-day living, isn't it?
And it was, and I didn't really recognise it as such. So I thought, oh, I'm just a bit stressed. I was a teacher, as you know, and teaching, as we know, and everyone who's not a teacher knows, it's very stressful. And there's lots and lots of stressful jobs, obviously. But the thing about teaching is that you're never really off duty, and that's what I found. And also, there were things going on with the school. And so the normal stress that happened were continuing to happen, and I thought I was dealing with those, but there just came a point after probably 2 or 3 years of this where I was in the classroom. I looked at the students and I just thought, I can't do it anymore. And I think I just had this moment of pure terror, and the students picked up on it, and it was everything just fell apart. And at the end of the lesson, which I couldn't wait to get to, I just went to the deputy head teacher. I said, I'm resigning, I can't do it. And then I just had a bit of a meltdown, not in front of the students, obviously. And I was in tears, and I just kept saying to her, I can't do it anymore, I can't do it anymore. And the school were fabulous, actually. They dealt with it really, really well. But I think that's the difference, having experienced that point where I literally couldn't do it anymore. I was, metaphorically on the floor. And I didn't know how to come back from it, and I sort of limped to the end of the school year and resigned.
This is the thing. This is burnout. This is you are on the floor.
Yeah.
You are mentally there, and it is so hard to come back from. When it is stress, there are points at which you can just about recover enough, boost your energy enough. And that's why we do need you to recognise the signs and symptoms of stress, so it doesn't turn into burnout.
Yes.
Now, you said something really interesting there. You said you didn't do anything about it because you felt a bit silly.
I did. I felt I could see my colleagues. They were seemingly happy. Who knows if they actually were in hindsight, but they were happy. They were coping. Not everyone. There were people with struggles. But rather than seek help before the point of no return, literally, I didn't. And I used to go home and then have all this work at home, and as every teacher does. But I think, there were other things going on, and the school was in crisis itself. So I think there were a lot of factors, and that was the result. Had I thought about, I'm not very good at asking for help, I never have been, so I didn't. Had I done that, perhaps I wouldn't have got to burning out. And maybe my teaching career might have carried on, who knows?
I think that's also really self-aware, actually, in the sense of knowing that you're not great at asking for help, because that is something that I think affects a lot of us.
Yes.
But also you do mention the school was in crisis, and that does make it harder for organisations, if they are in crisis themselves, to actually put in what's needed to support other people. In my own research, so I studied this area, what I found was people understood the stress of the job. So as a teacher, we get it. We get that students can be challenging. We get that work can pile on. We get that running up to Christmas or Easter or those times of the year, there's so many exams and things that you have to do.
Yeah.
But we accept that and we love that. It's the other things, the other pressures. And if there's no support from above, that's what causes the problem, because all of us then try and cope and cope and cope. Just as and I don't necessarily expect you to have a clear answer on this, but you say you didn't ask for help. Yes, it can be we don't like asking for help, but is there an element of, I don't want to burden other people because I see them struggling?
Yes, exactly. There's there is that, and because I knew that the head teacher and the deputy head and the management were also very stressed because of what was going on at the school, you kind of feel a little bit insignificant, and they don't want to have to address my issues when they've got a huge issue. And you know, colleagues are great because they're there to talk to, but at the end of the day, they can't actually do anything about the situation. So, yeah, I think there were many factors, and that might not have happened at another school, but it might have done. Who knows?
I think that's the thing. And let's just take a moment to talk about colleagues
Yeah.
as well, because sometimes colleagues can be a really wonderful source of support. In actual fact, that's what a lot of my research showed, that colleagues were what got people through their day. Yeah. However, if they're struggling, or if you see them sort of feeling they can't, can that actually exacerbate some of your feelings as well? You know, thinking, if they're struggling, it must be awful.
Well, especially as I was probably I was the newest teacher to the school. I was the most junior. So, so everyone else was more experienced. And I thought, well, gosh, if they're struggling, then, you know, how am I supposed to be able to cope with it as well? So that's an interesting question, actually. But essentially, colleagues are, I think, what get you through. And also the pure teaching aspect of it, I loved.
Yes.
It's everything else.
Yes. And I'm so glad you mentioned teaching in particular, because this is why I think a lot of people in teaching, in nursing, in the care professions, in any profession that could be seen as a calling or as that vocation, people stick it out.
Yes.
And we stick it out for far longer than perhaps we ought to. Just to come back to colleagues one more time, because you're absolutely right, they're a great source of support. They can be a better source of support than friends and family sometimes. And the reason for this is, if you were to speak to your friends and family about this, and I know I've had this as well, did they say to you, we'll just quit, or just leave?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Because it can be seen as a black and white decision. Yeah. But when you have a class, and when you're kind of attached to that class, which especially, I was in secondary first, then primary, then middle, so you have your own class when you're not in secondary. When you're kind of attached and you want to see them to get through to the end of the year, especially as there were broad problems, and you want to nurture your class through, you can't. It's like leaving a family or something similar, so it isn't easy to leave.
That's it. And this is why sometimes it can be more helpful, and this is worth schools or organisations or leaders being aware of. Yeah. It can be helpful to have other support, a mentor, a psychologist, somebody to come in to support the team underneath it, so they don't actually have to go home and almost feel like they're burdening their families as well. Because if you can talk about it amongst your peers or amongst people who don't have that desire just to make you happy, you know, just quit and you'll be much happier if you quit, and have that understanding of what the job is, I think it's a lot easier to talk things through and actually find a solution that covers that you might be attached to that class, you want to get through the year, and so on. Do you think an outside support would have helped in your case? So I'm just throwing that out there, really. It might not have.
No, well, actually, it did in my case. So when I said that the head teacher and the management were brilliant at my particular situation, they were fantastic, and they signed me off for a few weeks, and they made me attend, I can't remember what it was called now, but essentially a careers guidance with some psychologists thrown in, I think, where I had to go every week and talk things through and have an action plan about what it will be like when I go back. So they did do that, and it was fantastic, because they weren't a teacher, they weren't attached to school, they weren't family and friends, as you say. They were completely neutral, but they understood the situation. And I think that helped initially, and then going back to school and things were changed, and that helped me get to the end of the year. And that was that. So, but it definitely did help. It didn't make me want to stay in teaching long term, because I thought, I don't want that to happen again. And also, it's the children that are the important ones.
It's interesting that you say you didn't want it to happen again. We are going to carry on this discussion. But we do have a special guest, Dr. Laura Gierger. Now, she has been studying the subject of time management and how so many different time pressures can play on us and lead to burnout. And that is something we've been discussing. I'm really looking forward to what Dr. Laura is going to say.
There's more and more realization that beyond sort of financial resources and tangible resources that we know are essential for our well-being, we all need a certain level of comfort, a certain level of meeting the basic needs. At the same time, there's growing evidence that non-financial resources such as time, the way we spend our time, the way we think and experience time, is equally, if not more important for our well-being and our productivity. And there's a lot of biases around how we think about time that lead us to sort of misuse time. And one of them is this idea of overvaluing money over time and seeking careers and status that bring us more financial rewards at the expense of spending quality time with our friends and family, or pursuing our hobbies, or just simply resting, which is really crucial for well-being, but also for the quality of the work that we produce. So there's just one bias that I think has plagued our lives nowadays, the seeking of status and financial resources. There's also an interesting differentiation between time as an objective resource and time as a subjective resource. So originally, we started thinking about time as more of an objective coordination tool. When we said we're going to have this recording at 1 p.m., we both knew what it meant. And when it said we're going to have a meeting of a 1 hour long, we both understood what that means. But lately, we started to think about time as a very valuable resource that we seek to maximize. And that's more the subjective experience of time. There's some research showing that when we do things that we love, an hour can feel like 2 hours, right? But when we do things like having to answer email or administrative tasks, which are for me a drag, it just feels like time slows down. And I think this differentiator is very important because organizations and ourselves today as well, we kind of tend to continue to think about time from an objective perspective and use metrics of performance and success that align with objective time but not subjective time. So take, for instance, face time or long work hours. This is what's celebrated because it's more visible. But we know knowledge work is not about more time spent, but more about the quality of the in-depth work that you do. It really angers me when I see those kind of headlines and hear about the inequality that exists from a time perception at the gender level. One reason is that if you look at our history, and especially in developed countries, but not only, unpaid work, which is what housework is, it's not part of societal indexes of welfare and development, right? We're not putting $1 a month or £1 a month on unpaid work, and that leads people to think it's not valuable. It doesn't have a high value, so it becomes this invisible work that we all know contributes to society's development, right? Like all the work that women do, not just household tasks, but childcare. All those add up to the country's development, but it's not visible in the economic sense. So I think this has led a lot of people to discard it as being important. And it's not only at home, I think we see this at work as well, where women are asked and expected to do more of the low promotable tasks, they're called. So those are tasks that need to be done for the organization to survive, but they don't add up in learning new skills or getting promotions. They're like sort of household tasks or wifely activities or invisible work, some people call it, like note-taking or organizing events. All those things are necessary, but they tend to be put on the women's time, right? And we know we have a hard time saying no to things because we are pro-social and we care about others. So then there's the double sort of burden on us from two perspectives. One thing which is how we self-sabotage ourselves is this idea that we want to rely on willpower. Like, we're better. We know we're going to stop scrolling, right? Or I'm not going to interrupt myself. And there's research showing that willpower is not as good as using external cues to help us, right? External structures. So I recently started reusing this. I used to use it before, but I have a cube with different times on it, right? Like 60 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And I know that I interrupt myself if I don't have this on. And I put it on for how long I want to do something. And I try to stick to it until the time is up. And then I don't rely on my willpower. I use the clock to help me focus. Okay, top three. One is, just because it reminds me of some of the research that I've done and I published in Harvard Business Review on this, is being intentional about your time off. And what I mean by this is think ahead what you would like to do with your weekend or your holiday and make a list of some of the things that you want to do during your time off. Don't treat it like a work list, right? It's not about crossing things off. It's just about being intentional. Oh, this is what I would ideally like to do. When that time comes, try to do those things on your list, because otherwise, you know, the holidays are almost here and you might just end up spending the whole time in front of TV on the couch. And it's okay if you want to do that, but just be mindful that that's what you want to do in advance. And because we find that when people do set those kind of intentional goals for their time off, they do experience the time off better, they get more satisfaction from their leisure, and they have better well-being. So that would be tip number one. Tip number two, kind of going to maybe this idea of disconnecting from work and what could help to disconnect from work. I think there's this rushness towards the end of the year that we need to finish everything, right? Like, we have this endless to-do list that we need to finish by 31st of December. It's like the whole time ends. And that creates a lot of stress. And I think it burdens people to disconnect because you're so high on your to-do list and your workload that it will take so long to disconnect during the holidays. So what I would recommend to do is make a list of what is your most important thing to finish. And be mindful that it needs to be short, because we only have like 3 weeks, right, until the new year. And anything else, just write down where you are in your tasks and let them be for next year. This will give you a sense of satisfaction and sort of like, I can, I've done the most important things. I can go into the new year and pick up where I left off the other tasks and feel like you've accomplished some of your bigger goals. So that's tip number two. Tip number three, okay, this is more of a tool that maybe it's for 2024, but try an exercise where you keep track of how you spend your time and give scores to your activities in terms of how happy did they make you and how productive, like immersed in the flow did you feel. And then look at how you spend your time across 2 weeks, ideally. I've done this exercise with students, and they find it the most revealing in terms of things they thought they were actually enjoying and didn't, and things they were actually getting in the flow but didn't recognize that was a flow experience. I guess a more practical one, maybe around time off, is the other research that I didn't mention yet, which is I love the flexibility that I have in my job, that I can work whenever I want. But I did find in some evidence that it can undermine our intrinsic motivation if we work when other people are not working. Because it makes us think of all the things that we could be doing with our close friends and family. And it makes us question why we work in the first place. And since we tend to, I guess, we tend to justify work easier than leisure. So if we miss one day of work, we're gonna sacrifice one day of our leisure to do that work. But if we miss one day of leisure, we don't do the same. So I guess the third or fourth thing now, would be, if you're gonna work beyond your work hours or during weekends, try to make up for that time lost and take time off during the week.
Dr. Lara said some really interesting things there. She talked a lot about how there are many other pressures, exactly like you've already mentioned in our first conversation, that burnout is not as simple as just, this is my work and I'm now struggling with all the demands of work. Work doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with family and with friendships and with relationships and with so many other things going on. And so do you think we blame work unfairly sometimes?
Definitely. I mean, I speak to my friends and I say, how have you been? Oh, so busy with work. But they've got families, they've got wider family and other commitments. So work is, as you say, it's an aspect of your life. And if the other aspects of your life are really busy, it's easy to blame work when actually work might not be the issue. Now,
of course, burnout is not the only thing causing us stress in the workplace. Very recently, 2019, Paula Coles, a clinician, she wrote about something called rust out. I love this idea. It's like burnout's little sister.
Okay.
And rust out is where you're underwhelmed, you're feeling a bit meh, you're underappreciated, you're underused. That can be just as stressful and can then lead to similar exhaustion and symptoms. In the same way as almost you get burnout, which is the overwhelm and the overstressed and the overworked, and that leads to that level of anxiety and exhaustion. But actually, on the other end of the scale, you've got the meh, the apathy, the, oh, I just can't do this anymore, depression side of things, which is where rust out can take you. So have you ever been in a job where you felt so under-stimulated and appreciated that it's just caused you emotional?
I suppose I have. I mean, yes, I used to work in recruitment, and I was good at it, but oh my gosh, no, it didn't stimulate me, and it gave me anxiety going in because I just thought, how am I going to get through the day? So I don't know, maybe I wasn't. Maybe it was my fault. I don't know what the problem was, but I did have that fear. I've never heard the expression rust out, so that's interesting.
It's a lovely one, and it's only just become popular recently, in fact, so that's why I really like talking about it, because I think we do need to understand that under can be just as bad as over. And I'm not saying organisations have got this kind of magic wand that can find the sweet spot for everybody, but there are, I think, a few things we can do. And to pick up on what you said about you weren't being pushed, perhaps, even though you were good in the job. This is something where a lot of my clients, they don't know the difference between their strengths and their skills. Strengths are things that we're really good at and they energize us, even though we can learn and we can do more. Presenting's a strength, teaching itself would be a strength. Skills are things that we just learn and get good at and get praised for, but just exhaust us. And for some people that might be, for me, it's organisation, it's keeping spreadsheets. But yeah, I know some people love that, so I'm not dissing spreadsheets.
I love a spreadsheet.
Yeah, you see?
I love a spreadsheet.
That's it, nothing wrong with that. But it is about recognising what your strengths are and what your skills are and making sure you get promoted on your strengths.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
Do you sort of find you mix the two up? Because I used to.
Yeah, and I know you just explained it, and I think it's probably still in my head. I'm not really sure of exactly the difference. But yes, I think if somebody... If an employer should be able to identify the strengths of somebody and be able to bring those up.
Yes.
I'm just thinking about my experience at recruitment. I'm not sure it was my employer's fault that I was bored silly, but I don't know what they could have done because recruitment's recruitment.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, actually, I'm glad you bring that up because something that I have nailed my colours to the mast over is it can be employers' faults if you're bored silly.
Okay.
And I get that. And you're being very kind by saying I don't know what they could have done because actually, there's so many things employers can do now to make work meaningful. It could be that asking you, well, do you want to train as a mentor or as a coach or bring in other skills? Would you like to go on secondment? Would you like to, I don't know, start a five-a-side football club or something? You know, there are ways in which we don't have to leave a job. We can make that job more meaningful. So in just hypothetically in that situation, do you think you would have been able to explore other avenues? I know you didn't ask at the time. You would have probably been quite young at the time.
Yeah, I was.
Which is why we don't ask.
Yeah.
We don't like to step out of line when we're very young. But do you think there could have been other things that you could have brought in, even though the work itself was not that stimulating?
Yes. In hindsight, they probably could have given me spreadsheets to do. I don't know. Yes. And one thing they actually did do was give me a client abroad. So I had to go to Amsterdam all the time, which was amazing. So maybe they did see that. Maybe they did notice it and do that. So I was going every, I don't know, couple of months and staying a few days and recruiting out there. So that was good. And I have to give kudos to my ex-employer for that, definitely.
Yeah, that's really nice, actually, because there are so many different things that we can add on into the workplace, because this comes back to what we said earlier about friends and family saying, oh, just leave.
Okay.
Sometimes we can't just leave.
No.
Because if you've got family and you've got children attending a school, or you've got, you can't go and commute, 50 miles away or something like that, of course you can't just leave. So.
No, and it was just me, and I had a mortgage, and, I didn't, I needed to stay in the job until I could. And then I went into teaching. So.
It's interesting, though, because I sometimes think knowing what you don't want to do is actually just as good as knowing what you do want to do.
Definitely. Yeah, although having said that, I did go back to recruitment when a friend of mine set up his own recruitment company. He said, oh, please come and work for me. And that was after I'd left teaching. So I did do that for a little while because I knew I could, but it gave me the whole same anxiety. How am I going to get through the day? Oh, because I'm not very good at having nothing to do, or not that there's nothing to do, but I needed to fill that time, and I wanted it to be meaningful, and I don't know, it just wasn't the job for me, I guess.
Well, my next guest, Dr. Lauren Howe, she's a professor of business psychology in the University of Zurich. She is going to talk to us about what organisations can do to improve well-being, to recognise when people are struggling, and to put things in place to help us out a little bit.
A lot of my research focuses on the future of work, aiming to think about people as active shapers of the future of work rather than just passive recipients of a future of work that is determined by technology. And so in my research, one of the findings that I think is very important that I'm excited about is when you ask people to imagine the future of work, a lot of the time people focus on technology and its role in shaping the world of work, where they think, when it comes to the jobs of the future, the things that really will matter are having technical expertise, like programming skills, working with artificial intelligence. And of course, we know that this is one part of the future of work that's important. But there's also this very human side of the future of work. That's another side to the story. It's not just the technical skills that experts predict will matter in the future of work, but also these very fundamentally human skills like empathy, emotional intelligence, collaboration. This is also part of the story that can sometimes be overlooked when it comes to hype around technology. And of course, the way that we imagine the world of work shapes what we do today to prepare for it, what kinds of skills we invest in training and developing. So that's where I think it's very important for us to consider what we focus on when we imagine the future of work, so we work towards creating a future that we actually want, one that kind of gets the best out of both humans and machines, so to say. To some degree, we're grappling with an interesting historical legacy when it comes to thinking about emotion and well-being at work, where for so many decades, the dominant ethos was emotions don't belong at work, like leave them at the door, get down to business. But we know now that that's not a realistic way for people to be, and that actually positive and negative emotions at work predict all of the outcomes that we care about when it comes to work. Not only things like productivity and performance, but also health-related things, whether people are absent from work, also their creativity and their innovation, and their own kind of well-being. So I think we now are starting to take emotions very seriously at work as a core part of the things that matter at work. The main question I think that a lot of people are grappling with is, knowing that emotion is important, how can we tap into it at work? How can we get the best out of people by helping them to feel how they want to feel at work? I think I would really put at the core of it stress, which of course can be, caused by so many different things. And I think sometimes stress can be caused by emotional labor, by suppressing emotions at work. Sometimes I think the emotions at work might be a symptom of something else that's not going well. So if you're overwhelmed by emotion at work, it could be a sign that the workload is much too demanding, that you're struggling with toxic relationships at the workplace. So I think while stress is the cause of a lot of ill health, both physically and emotionally, it's really kind of looking behind the stress, like peeking behind the curtain to try to figure out what the root causes might be in a given case. I think part of it starts with not only taking emotions seriously at the workplace, but also creating time and space in order to engage with emotions more. So for some leaders, that could be just making sure that you're actually tracking emotions at work. Are you measuring how employees feel so you can understand where do they feel better or worse? Where is there room for improvement? What's going well? So I think you have to know first where there may be a problem before you can work to solve that problem. And I think then for leaders and employees, that also means creating space to talk about emotions at work. As a leader, maybe sharing your own emotions so that employees learn that it's okay to bring emotions into work. Doesn't mean that you have to talk about emotions all the time, but creating the kind of appropriate space for that. And for employees, I think it also means even learning yourself to take your own emotional pulse, to understand, when do I feel energized? When do I feel drained? How can I pay more attention to my own emotions at work in order to help myself feel the way that helps me to work and be my best self?
Welcome to Business Boost. Now, Business Boost is the moment in the show where we give some tips for organizations and leadership, purely because it helps to understand what people are going through. And if you're in the position where you can make changes, you can help those people even more. And so that's why we want to spend a little bit of extra time for organizations and for leaders. Now, we have been talking about burnout, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about setting boundaries and helping other people set boundaries. You can use these tips for yourself. You can use these tips if you're teaching clients. You can use these tips if you are role modeling to your teams. But the first thing about boundaries is to remember that no is a complete answer. And if you want to be polite, you can say no, thank you. That's also fine. However, I do know that some people really struggle with boundaries. And because last year, I think Love Actually celebrated an anniversary, I have my Love Yourself Actually placards. Now, I think that bit in Love Actually is a little bit stalkery and weird, and I've always thought that, even before Richard Curtis said that at the end of last year, but I want you to practice these phrases with me. The first phrase is to ask, how can I best help you? So if you don't want to say no, and someone asks you for help, how can I best help you? The reason why this is such a powerful phrase is because if you're anything like me, you're a problem solver. You want to get the solution straight away, which means that you jump straight into offering a solution. But if you actually take the moment to ask the question, how can I best help you? What is the best thing that I can do for you right now? Chances are you might get them to say to you, well, actually, I've tried X, Y, and Z, and I'd like you to do this. You actually get an insight into what the problem really is, which means that anything that you do to help is going to be more targeted and more effective. So, how can I best help you? Phrase number 2. I'm sorry I can't, but so-and-so might. I'm sorry I can't, but so-and-so might. Signposting. There is huge value in signposting other people. And signposting is simply doing exactly this. I can't do it right now, but someone else might be able to help you. And this is where, if you have a list of people that they can call on, or a list of emails, or in the case of maybe someone's asked you how to write a report or how to write a script or a presentation, if you have a template, which perhaps you've taken all the key bits out of, you can give them that template to use. Because again, very much like how best can I help you, you are empowering that person to do the work. You're not doing it for them. So similarly, I'm sorry I can't do this, but somebody else could help you. You have helped because you've pointed them in the right direction, whether that's through giving them a different number or giving them a template, but you are allowing them to take the onus on themselves and carry on looking for support further. Next one. I can, but only at X time, or I can, but between X and Y. Set boundaries on your time. This is particularly helpful when somebody does the whole, could I just borrow you? Could you just, because they might say to you, I'm just going to take 5 minutes of your time. It's going to take them 5 minutes to explain, but probably about 50 minutes for you to fix. So it may be better for you to just say, well, I can do this. We can do this. I will help, but I can only do it at 5 o'clock today. Or I can do this and I can help you do this, but only between 1 and 2. Set boundaries on your time. Again, you are still helping people. And actually, if they've gone off and found someone else to do it, well then your problem solved. So set boundaries. The other thing that you can use this for is if you have an event or something that you maybe don't want to spend too much time at and you don't have the excuse of I've got to go home for the dog, you can say to people, well, I can be there, but I can only be there between this time and that time. You have already managed expectations. So that's another helpful hint. My all-time favorite is don't commit to anything whilst you're in a good mood, and use this phrase instead. If you take nothing else away from me today, take this. I'll tell you later, I don't have my diary. No one knows whether you've got your diary or not. So if you actually just stall for time and say, oh, I'll tell you later, I've got to check my diary, or I've got to check my calendar, or I've got to check Teams, or whatever it might be, people don't know what your times are. And if you can stall, what you can do is you can use that time to think about, well, do I actually want to do this? And if I don't, I've got time to think of a reason why I can't. So use these boundary setting phrases. They are a form of self-care. If you spread yourself too thinly, you are not actually going to end up doing a really good job. So it's important not only that you start setting boundaries to ensure the quality of your work, but also you role model it to anybody who is looking up to you as well. Now, after this, we are going to go on to our first resident expert. It is Dr. Meg Arrell. She is our psychologist, and she is going to be talking about ways we can recognize those signs and symptoms of stress before they become burnout.
So burnout, or burnout syndrome, was only formally recognised in 2019, and then it was really seen to primarily be a condition to do with work and in the workplace. So feeling incredibly at the end of your tether in terms of work demands and some occupational types of pressures. But we know that burnout can have many different forms, including emotional burnout. So if you feel a sense of overwhelm in other situations than just work, that is entirely common, and it's something that I see on a regular basis in my practice. So what are some of the early signs of burnout? Well, they can be cancelling on friends, and the odd cancellation is nothing to worry about, but when you cancel consistently, it could be just an indicator that burnout is on the horizon. Also, some things like sleep difficulties start to arise, really feeling that sense of overwhelm, that things that you used to do quite easily feel like a huge mountain to climb. Those are some early indicators of burnout. I feel there's never enough time in the day to get everything done. And again, this feels incredibly overwhelming. But also you don't feel able to ask people for help in any way. Also, that you really feel like you have to multitask everything, that it'd be hard to concentrate on one thing at a time because perhaps there's just too much to do, or it feels like there's too much to do. Now, related to this, what tends to happen is performance starts to dip, actually, and so you may be finding tasks at work that bit more difficult. Perhaps people have noticed actually that you might be struggling a little bit. Then in terms of some health manifestations, sleep now is getting really quite troublesome. You may find it difficult to fall asleep, so that's about sleep initiation, or you may wake up quite a lot in the night and not be able to go back to sleep. That's about sleep maintenance. So this compounds the problem because then you're even more tired in the day, and all those tasks feel even more overwhelming. Also, weight could fluctuate. You could lose weight rapidly or gain weight, and that is to do with hunger signals related to the stress response. So there are quite a few indicators of burnout, and if you are starting to feel these, it's important not to ignore them and to really check in with yourself, because again, something that tends to happen when people are either on the way to burnout or very much within this syndrome is that self-care just goes completely out the window. So check in with these signs and signals, and if it feels familiar, start to look at sources of help and resources, because we do all need support throughout our lives.
So when it comes to burnout and stress, recognizing stress, were there any symptoms where you kind of maybe ignored them?
For stress, definitely. A slight reluctance to engage with managers or whoever might have been causing the stress in terms of the colleagues. I started to become micromanaged by a certain manager, which was really difficult because when you've been performing in your job year after year and your appraisals have always been very good, so you don't need micromanaging, then somebody starts to do that to you, that's really horrible because you feel like you're being watched all the time.
Yeah.
You feel like suddenly you're not being trusted. That for me, that's one of the most stressful things that can happen at work.
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, it was a writer called Lencioni. They talked about the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Okay.
The top of which, absence of trust.
Right, okay.
That's straight away. And it's not even, people can tell you, oh, we're managing you because of this, or we're supporting you because of that.
Yeah.
You don't believe them.
No. No, it's because they want to know what you're doing at any given moment, and they want justification for why you've done something, and you're thinking, but I've done this in this particular way for this many years, why all of a sudden is that not good enough? And for me it happened when a new person joined, and it was that new person, I thought, well, you haven't been here. Yeah. Anyway, and it can lead to frustration and resentment and all of those things, so and then sometimes that can go on too long, and then again and then you lose the relationship with that person, and it's all a big mess. So again, recognizing it right from the beginning and addressing it is probably the best thing to do. Yeah. And now I do recognize that. Yeah,
that's really good. And so what things did you use to try and deal with stress?
Probably not enough.
You're not alone, you're not alone.
I mean, what can we use to deal with stress?
This is a good question, and not all of these things are going to work for everybody. Yeah. But I will give you a few things, and I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, Judy, to go through some of these with me. The first is not telling somebody who's stressed to calm down.
Yes.
Yeah. Seriously, because that gets people more and more worked up. Now, this one, you probably will have done this before, and at the point of crisis, especially if you're supporting someone through a low-level panic attack, or you're just feeling things are getting that little bit too much, the NHS in the UK talks about this a lot. It's the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, and it's lovely. And it starts off by simply looking around the room, name 5 things that you can see. So name 5 things you can see in the studio right now.
In here, there's a lovely sign, my lovely 2 colleagues, the light, the chair, and the mat.
Perfect.
Or the rug, I should call it.
Perfect. 4 things you can hear.
Traffic, yourself. Probably not a lot else, actually.
Okay.
Myself.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
3 things you can touch.
Okay.
Physically.
The table, the chair, my dress, my hair.
Lovely.
That's
So
4.
use loads. Yeah, no, that's it. Don't get caught up on whether it's 5 things you can see or 4 things you can hit. It's 5 sensors and
it's the act
5 things. It's the act.
Is it kind of like a focusing thing and a grounding? Okay.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
It's grounding. What that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 does, so you take through 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, be kind. and 1 thing
lovely.
you can... See, this is why we do this. 1 thing you can taste. It's exactly like you said. It's grounding because it makes us focus on what's going on right now. And that means it gets us out of our heads. One of the biggest problems when we're stressed is we're in here. And we have to do what we can to get out there. And literally having to name things around the room, that's one way of doing it. And another thing you can do is we've got wooden flooring here, and we can count the slats of wood on our floor. That's another thing you can do. You can count the second hands on a clock as well. Again, it's about getting you out of your head. Now, do you ever use affirmations?
No.
Okay. People don't always like affirmations, but these I find quite nice at the point of crisis as well. And the way I use affirmations is you take a deep breath in, try and breathe from the diaphragm, so you take a deep breath in. And normally you would just breathe out through your mouth, so blowing out through the mouth. But if you use an affirmation, that on the 1 breath out, you're saying the affirmation. So again, it's a grounding technique, but also you're slowing down your breathing. So this is one of my favourite affirmations, and I'd like you to try it, and I'll do it with you. Okay. The affirmation is, I cannot save people from themselves. I cannot save people from themselves. So we breathe in, and we breathe out with, I cannot save people from themselves. And we do that again, we breathe in, and I cannot save people from themselves. And it reminds you exactly that. Sometimes you can do everything you can, but if they're still going to go and do whatever behaviour is not healthy or helpful, that's all we can do.
That's actually a really good one, especially if you work on your own, because if you have a colleague, you can just vent to your colleague. You can't do that really unless you've got a dog or a cat or something.
Yeah, and we do have a studio dog, so
we do.
That is always lovely. But yeah, absolutely. It's a really nice one that's just in that moment where somebody's frustrated you a little, perhaps, or caused frustration in you. There is another affirmation which you can use. It's a lot kinder if you want to, if you feel that one's a bit mean. And that is, even if I can't control anything else, I can control my breathing.
Okay.
So even if I can't control anything else, I can control my breathing. Now this is a nice one because it's a very long one. So we breathe in, and even if I can't control anything else, I can control my breathing. Once more, breathing in. Even if I can't control anything else, I can control my breathing.
Love it.
It's a great one, isn't it? It's so fun. Now, anytime you do breath work, and we will talk about things like soma breath work and other forms of breath work, a lot of people, the mistake people make is they focus too much on the in-breath. And that's why affirmations spoken are quite helpful, because it's all about the out-breath. If you don't breathe out fully, that's when actually you start getting lightheaded. Okay. So focus more on the out-breath than you do on the in-breath when doing any kind of breathing, because otherwise that will then cause panic and fear and exacerbate feelings of stress.
Okay.
Now, something else we can do. It's a little challenge, and it's called the Spices Challenge, and this is looking after our self-care in 6 different ways. The first S stands for spiritual, and this is actually given to me by Sharon Lawton, who is our resident coach on the show. So focus on the spiritual. That might be mindfulness, meditation, and so on. So do you do any of that kind of thing yourself, or do you not like it? And it's okay not to like it.
I don't. However, I am going to a workshop tomorrow all about meditation, mindfulness, singing, as well. So yeah, so I will let you know after tomorrow if I like it or not.
That's it. And we're actually going to have Judith's segment on that in an upcoming show, which will be brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's okay if you don't like it. It's just an option. So that's why we've got 6 different things. P, physical. That might be going for a run, which some people love. But also it might be putting on some music and just dancing around the house. And just getting moving in some way. Are you into the physical side of things at all?
I take my dog for a little walk if I feel, you know, I need to get out.
Yeah.
Just put the lead on and go for a walk.
Perfect, perfect. I, intellectual. Now this is an unusual one because this one people don't realise is a form of self-care. It's when you read a book or you watch a show which speaks to you, or even if you watch a documentary on Netflix or have that kind of chill moment where you're learning something.
Okay.
So again, is that a way that you might use for
Yes,
self-care?
that's probably my go-to. So I'll read for a little while. Definitely put the TV on and just forget everything. It just blocks everything else, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Just blocks everything out.
Yeah.
It takes your mind. We don't want to be in that inner spiral of negative thinking. SPIC is creative, and that can be writing poetry or songs and things like that, but it can be choreographing a dance. It can be getting creative with what we wear and how we do our hair or makeup or anything like that. Okay. So how might you use, or have you used creativity?
Singing, I suppose.
Yes.
Doing lots of singing stuff over the last few years. Yeah, probably that's the main creativity. Bit of drawing.
Yeah, perfect. And again, don't fall into the adult thinking trap of, and I don't know whether you do this, I do this a lot, of it must be perfect. If I'm going to draw, it has to be perfect. If I'm going to play something, it has to be perfect. So that's creativity. The other E is emotional, and you've already mentioned friends and family. It's great to be hanging around with them. And the last is social, giving back to our community. Again, gets us out of our heads. You do a lot of community work, don't you?
Yes.
How does that make you feel?
It's brilliant. I work a lot, with the community, with work and with singing. So that's really fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that we can do ourselves when it comes to looking after our own well-being and reducing the effects of stress. However, that's not all we need to think about. We also need to make changes from above. So again, if you're in the workplace, you may be in a position to be able to make those changes. And in Nature Watch, John Goldwyn is going to be talking to us about the benefits of having plants and nature within the workplace. And then our resident coach, Sharon Lawton, will be teaching organisations some of the things they can do to better look after the well-being of their teams.
For me, it's very simple. You could spend a lot of money making your workspace very natural. In the past, I've been involved in creating incredible courtyards and balconies and organically inspired biophilic buildings. But I think it's important to remember that you can just get away from your computer, step away from your workspace. If you have a short break, maybe it's time to train your brain to be more productive by spending time away from your desk for a few moments. And if that time's spent in nature, in a park or in a local garden or just sitting outside, that really needs to become part of your routine if you're going to make the most of it. And maybe with a little bit more time away from the desk, your outlook will be improved. You might be more productive. You might face your day with a little bit more positivity. You might enjoy it more. It's important to remember that we are part of nature. We're not separated from it. We may have engineered it into buildings and roads and cities, but actually nature is all around us and we're actually part of it.
Hello lovely viewers, I'm Sharon Lawton, a professionally accredited life coach and mentor, and it's an absolute pleasure to be with you as we dive into some more topics that have the potential to shape your life. Now today we're going to be sharing some workplace tips to improve your well-being. So grab your journal, grab a cup of tea and let's dive in. So tip number 1, embrace positive connections with your work colleagues. Our work environments are not just about tasks and deadlines, it's about a place where we connect with people and collaborate. Cultivate positive relationships with your colleagues, engage in meaningful conversations, and also offer that little bit of support where needed. Tip 2, prioritise boundaries and prioritise self-care. In the pursuit of our professional excellence, it's so easy to overlook self-care and well-being. So create a balance where you can prioritise some self-care activities. Now, whether that be a hobby or whether it be something else, it's really important. So that could be spending time with loved ones or just spending some quality reflective time alone. Now remember, a well-nurtured self is in a much better and positive position to be able to handle the stress and strains of everyday life at work. Tip number 3 is to take regular screen breaks. Among our digitally focused day, it's so important to give our minds and our eyes a breather. Incorporate regular screen breaks into your day. Step away, stretch, take a walk, and incorporate that regularly into your schedule. So I hope you found these short tips useful. So until our paths cross again, remember to take away at least one thing that you can reflect on or action. Because if you want things to be different, you have to do something different. So until the next time, stay inspired, stay empowered.
If you have anything that you would like us to discuss in the area of mental health and well-being, please email us on studio@wellbeingmedia.org, and we will happily take a deep dive into all things that you wish us to discuss. Until next time, goodbye.